Good evening to you all. This is the Date Olive Speakers Forum. I'm the moderator, Stu Heller, and tonight we have the pleasure of listening to Randy Oakley. And Randy is going to take us along on his great bicycle adventure, which he did in 2017 from the Peace Arch along the Canadian border, almost all the way down to Cabo San Lucas. Randy was born and raised in Seattle, went to Evergreen State College. He started a career in computer science as a teenager working for the Boeing company. He's an avid whitewater paddler in his youth anyway, and that's how he and Shelley met at a whitewater kayak race. They borrowed a two-person boat, competed in the mixed doubles category, and they took first place. They've always had a magical connection, not just in the boat, but in life. They raised 3 kids and now enjoy 3 grandkids. After he retired from his computer science career, he marked this transition by taking this long bike ride. So I twisted his arm, and now he's going to tell us about it. Randy, please.
Okay. All righty, let's see. All right, so are you seeing the slideshow deck?
Got it.
Okay. So this happened starting in the end of the July through August and into September, a little bit of 2017. Shelley and I had just moved back to the West Coast from New York after spending 2 years in New York. And so my ride, I went 47 days on the ride, covered 1,822 miles, during which I lost 15 pounds of fat and I gained 5 pounds of muscle and I lost 2 pant sizes. So that was pretty good. Now, there was a little misinterpretation in the intro. It's like I didn't go to Cabo San Lucas. It was basically to San Diego.
I said almost.
Yeah, well, Cabo's another 1,000 miles farther south. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so I was living in New York with my son and daughter-in-law, with the twins and Micah, right before this trip. And, you know, riding the 10-mile loop or 10-kilometer loop around Central Park, it's a nice little bike ride, but it's not really an adequate amount of training for riding a bunch, you know, basically riding all day sort of a thing every day. So I kind of did an approach of just taking it easy and getting in shape as I went. So the bike I was using is a thing called a recumbent, which is where you're sitting like in a lawn chair rather than an upright bike, and it makes it a lot more comfortable. The other thing that's very nice about the recumbent is the scenery. You really get to enjoy the scenery because, you know, your natural position in it is you're facing out and you can just take in the scene. You know, on a regular bike, you know, if you want to look around, you got to kind of pull your neck up and your neck gets tired and stuff like that. So I did this ride in 2017. I'd got the bike in 2003 and it when I started the ride, it already had 14,000 miles on the bike. So you know, so I was well familiar with the bike and knew that it fit me well, and I was very comfortable with it. So that part of it worked pretty well. And for carrying all my stuff, I had these very large saddlebags on the back. And I also had on top of that rear rack, I had like an insulated bag that's sort of like a little bit cooler, you know, like a cooler that I could carry food in. And also on the back of the seat, there was like a hydration pack. I had to carry 3 liters of water in. And so I camped a lot of the nights. So I brought along a 1-person tent, a fairly thick air mattress, excuse me, like a down quilt, not a sleeping bag, but like a quilt, and like a hooded jacket, and a hammock and a tarp. And I actually slept in the hammock maybe 60% of the nights. I slept in the tent maybe about 10% or 20%, and the rest of the time in hotels or hostels or this a thing like it's called warm showers, and it's sort of like couch surfing, but specifically for cycle tourists. I pretty much only used the tent when there weren't any suitable trees or there was a lot of mosquitoes. For cooking, I used an alcohol stove. And one of the main reasons why I use the alcohol stove is because it's completely silent while you're cooking. And the alcohol fuel is something that you can kind of get anywhere. And so that, you know, I've done other trips before where I use the little butane powered stoves, and it's like, but you can't get the fuel kind of anywhere. So that led to a lot of concern.
Is this stuff liquid? You carry it around in a bottle or?
Yeah, it's just like it's like denatured alcohol, which you can get like at any like paint store or hardware store. So like even if you're in a small town, you can get it. So
Uh-huh.
it's, you know, it's like the butane camping gas. You know, you have to have like an outdoor store like REI or something like that to get it, and you're not going to find that those in little towns in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So for breakfast, I'd usually eat. I had either tea or instant coffee. Granola with powdered milk was my most common breakfast, and occasionally I'd make something like eggs and bacon. So for lunch, I would often eat a quote unquote second breakfast at like a, you know, a restaurant where you could go in and get like an eggs and bacon type breakfast or something like that. Or, you know, like if you can see the little, you know, street tacos, taco trucks and things like that, it'd be the kind of stuff I'd go to. Oops. So for my dinners, for the most part, what I do is like stop in a little store and I'd get like a frozen entree and like a bag of frozen vegetables. And then I'd sort of mix those together, still semi-frozen, into my little cook pot and use it on the simmer setting on the alcohol stove. And it would like gently warm it up and stuff like that. So, you know, a lot of times I consider like a frozen entree to be too salty, you know, too much sodium. But when you're riding your bike 6 hours a day, you sweat a lot. So that part worked out okay. And I didn't really do that much snacking. I wasn't like, you know, a lot of people when they're riding their bikes, they, you know, they're eating granola bars or whatever along the way to kind of keep their energy up. But I kind of rode at a relaxed enough pace that I didn't really need to keep like fueling myself in that way. So yeah, so because I wasn't really in shape starting this trip, I just really took it easy. And when I'd get on hills, I'd just go into a pretty low gear and just sort of, you know, kind of work my way up it without like, you know, pushing myself too hard. And I would take low mile days or 0 mile days as I needed. And I'd always take time to stop and enjoy the view or take a picture of like an eagle just sitting up on a power pole and things like that.
A question for you.
Yeah.
Is a recumbent hard to climb hills with?
You know, I had the gearing was low enough that I could just put it in a low gear and just sort of steadily work my way up. I mean, compared to like a regular bike, the recumbents are less efficient, mainly because they're heavier, they weigh more than a regular bike. So it's like you're trading off the comfort for the extra weight, you know. So it's like compared to like a comparable in terms of like touring bike, you know, it's probably weighed like 10, 15 pounds more, which is quite a bit. So, but you know, the way it's set up, you can ride very slowly up the hills because it's very stable. Now, when I was camping, I mostly stayed at these things called hiker biker campsites that are well distributed along the West Coast route. And usually they're in like normal campgrounds, but they're like specific sites or areas within the regular like car camping campground where you don't need a reservation. It's for people arriving by bicycle or on foot. And you don't, you know, they're never full. They'd only occasionally be crowded because you're sharing sort of like a large campsite with other cyclists. So, which is a good opportunity to, you know, socialize with other people that are of like minds and stuff like that. And, you know, and the nice thing about like a lot of the state park campgrounds is they do have hot showers, which is something that's, you know, very, very nice thing to have if you've been riding your bike all day.
Randy, how would you handle security? I mean, you go take a shower. Who's watching your bike, your wallet, that sort of thing?
You know, like when I started out, I did have like a high security bike lock, but I got rid of that after a while. You know, for the most part, like security was more of an issue, like doing things like going into a store to buy groceries.
Yeah.
So I had like a lightweight, you know, like padlock and cable,
Oh,
the sort of thing that it's like, you know, a respectable bike thief would be able to buzz through that in like no time. But, you know, for the most part, wasn't really an issue, you know.
okay.
I mean, you know, for me, it's like, you know, you know, for recharging things like electronics, I started out with a solar panel to help me recharge them. But I found that was relatively useless because a lot of overcast days, and while you're riding, you can't really get the orientation of the panel towards the sun that effective. So what I found was an effective method of keeping my electronics charged up is having an like an auxiliary battery. And what I do is just sort of like take the auxiliary battery and plug it in to a charger in the bathroom and just leave it there overnight. And then when the next morning I'd have a fully recharged battery that I could then charge my phone with. And that never got stolen, or interestingly enough,
Mhm,
with it being there in there at night.
mhm.
Now some of the state parks at like the ranger would offer, you could leave your phone with them in like the ranger booth, and they would like have a whole setup for recharging people's phones. But for the most part, security really wasn't that big of an issue. Now, I kind of like rode through San Francisco in one day, and kind of, and then like when I stayed at a youth hostel when I was in Los Angeles. So they had like a place to park my bike inside the building. So it mostly worked out. So I did overpack something. So I brought like a mini laptop and a big heavy bike lock and a big first aid kit and a few other things, which fortunately I visited my nephew who was living in Port Angeles at the time, and I was able to drop off a bunch of the extra stuff. I brought along like a rain jacket and pants. I didn't really use it. That was good. Solar panel we already talked about. I also bought some stuff along the way, like flip-flops, more socks and underwear, and a lightweight synthetic jersey, because it, eventually as I got more, especially once I got south of San Francisco, it started getting a lot warmer. North of San Francisco, it's like I was always a little damp. It was never like warm and sunny until I got south of San Francisco. Now, I did have some challenges along the way. One of the biggest things I ran into is that after about 2 weeks, I started getting numbness on the balls of my feet. The sort of clip-in paddles I was using kind of held my feet in a very specific position, on the pedal. And so like that, right under the spot where like right where the ball of your foot would be clipped into the pedal, that started going numb. So I switched to these big platform style pedals, which provide a lot broader area of support. Plus your foot shifts around on it. So after that, the numbness started to go away. So, also, I developed a crack, you can see here, in the rim of my front wheel, and from just wear. And fortunately, I lucked out and I found like a BMX, because it's the same size as the BMX wheels, in a little town of Garberville in California. And it must have been sitting in that shop for at least a decade when it was just waiting there for me. And I think it was still there because it was purple. All the kids that were riding BMX bikes, probably didn't want purple rims or something, but it was good for me to be able to pick up a spare wheel along the way.
What's a BMX?
Bicycle motocross. So it's like kids
Oh,
riding their bikes over jumps and things like that.
I see.
So the first week from the Peace Arch border in Canada down to Potlatch State Park, down on the Olympic Peninsula, I did 311 kilometers and 1 0 day with one day of only being 17 kilometers and the longest day being 85 kilometers. So that was the first week. And I definitely remember along the way of like, my legs feeling very sore at some points because it's like I was jumping right in without really being in shape. So we had started out at Peace Arch. First night I camped at Birch Bay, had a kind of a nice sunset. And then the next day we go along Chuckanut Drive and Anacortes and taking the San Juan Ferry over to Vancouver Island. And Sydney has some neat waterfront art. And they've got some really nice bike paths that to get down to Victoria. And then of course, Victoria is very cute. And there's this ferry that runs in the summer between Victoria and Port Angeles called the Coho. So I took a ride on that, and it was pretty cool ride on the ferry. And then in Port Angeles, you get on, there's a thing called the Olympic Discovery Trail, which was pretty nice to ride on. My nephew lived in Port Angeles. I stayed with him while I was there. And then this one skier friend of mine saw, from my posts on Facebook that I was doing this ride. And so he got all excited and joined me partway out of Port Angeles to ride down along the Hood Canal. He's just sort of a very spontaneous guy. So, but then it's like the first night to camp, he was like, no, we can't camp in the campground. I'm afraid someone's going to steal my bike. So we ended up like stealth camping in the woods off the side of the road. But, with a hammock, all you need is 2 trees. The ground doesn't even need to be cleared or anything like that. But that was the only time I stealth camped on the whole trip. Every time else I was in a campground. And some nice views of the Hood Canal. And here we see sort of a dual use of the frozen vegetables, using that to ice my knee at the end of the day. So then week 2 was between Potlatch State Park and Cape Lookout in Oregon.
Oh, question for you, if I might.
Yeah.
Did you try to go on trails like the Discovery Trail as much as possible, or did you end up on roads a lot?
So this is mostly like riding on roads. Occasionally there were some places where there was a trail you could follow, like the Olympic Discovery Trail. So I used that. But, I thoroughly think the only other place where there was really trail going the way I needed to go was sort of down like in Los Angeles County. There's like a trail that goes along the beach down there. And I do that rather than riding on, like going through, Muscle Beach and things like that. There was a trail along the beach, but mostly it was just riding on the road. But, and other than when you're in cities, the amount of traffic was actually pretty light. So, and so second week, camped at Lake Sylvia in Washington, which was pretty nice. And then you get to look at the vast mud flats in Willapa Bay as we went along there. And in Cape Disappointment, you get the lighthouse. And this was one of the campgrounds where I camped in my tent because there was a lot of mosquitoes at this campground. And this was psychologically a very challenging part leading up to it, which is there's this like 4-mile long bridge across the Columbia to get to Astoria. But It actually wasn't too bad. They restriped it a little bit and it wasn't as bad as I anticipated. There was a wide enough shoulder that it wasn't too bad. And I had favorable conditions when I went across. And let's see. So then it's, oop. I've got it all messed up. As soon as you get across, then there's this famous shipwreck, which I had to visit, so as I was going along, I was taking my time and relaxing so I could do some of the touristy things. And of course, in Seaside, some of the local color was pretty entertaining. And Canna Beach there's some of their big sea stacks. Whoop. And here is like one of the sections where, the way the road goes is like you end up climbing a long ways above the water. It's like you'd think, oh, you're just going down the coast. It should be flat, but you end up going up and down quite a bit. And of course, a stop at the Tillamook factory was, of course, required. And at Cape Lookout, somebody took a picture of me. So. And then the third week, getting a little bit more mileage in the week. And like here, it's like the shortest day was 66 kilometers and longest day was almost 100 kilometers. So I'm starting to get in a little bit better shape now. And like I said, you do climb up and then drop down. So sometimes you get these big views. And then you get these sea cliffs and stuff like that, stuff to look at, and a lot of interesting trees and rock formations along this section of the Oregon coast. But as you can see, like, it's not like bright sunny weather here. And here we have one of the places we crossed was Depot Bay, which 2017 was the year of that total solar eclipse. And Depot Bay was going to be like the center of where it was coming ashore, so to speak. But it was pretty foggy when I was there, and I was there about 2 weeks before the eclipse. But it's quite the little harbor. Let's see if the video works. Didn't work. Oh well. And in this sort of windswept environment, it kind of sculpts the trees in a very interesting way. So there was a tree I thought was worthy of taking a picture of. And this is just this is Port Orford at a kind of a typical view of what the coast down there looks like. Just get these big rock formations mixed in with the beach. And down near Brookings, there was these, see how there's like these arches? Someday I'd like to go back in my sea kayak and paddle around down there. And here, and of course, here we're gonna go into California and into the redwoods. And so it gets a little bit touristier, but look at the size of that tree.
Wow.
And then more of this sort of really rocky tree coast with, of course, mist and fog. And then this section of it, you kind of get off the main highway and take like the 1930s vintage highway to ride along. Let's see if this one's going to work. No. But there, through that section, you get to ride through these giant trees. Pretty cool. And then about in here, I branched off the 101 and onto the California one. And so to get more along the close, the 101 goes inland, and the one goes right along the coast. A little fewer trees along this section of the coast. And now in Sea Ranch, it was interesting. There was, I guess, this was an area that the Russian fur traders used to do stuff in before they sold Alaska to the United States. But there were some cultural artifacts of the time they were down there. Just some like amazingly beautiful coastline. This and like I said, these sort of like sculpted trees that are sculpted by the environment. Pretty interesting. And then I spent a couple nights in San Rafael where I met Shelley and our daughter Emily. And this also worked out to be the timing of when that eclipse was that summer. But you know, this was our view of the eclipse. So then after that, the first thing was getting across the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, I kind of got a relaxed start that day, so I didn't really get out onto the bridge deck until about 10:30 in the morning. And that was kind of a mess because there was already a lot of people. So there's like a separate, walkway, bikeway on the bridge. You're not with the car traffic at all, but it's a very popular tourist destination. So it was not easy riding along the bridge. In retrospect, I'd either want to get like a really early start and start riding on the bridge deck by 7 in the morning, or take one of the passenger ferries to get across the Golden Gate, rather than like dodging the tourists going across the bridge. At the time, our daughter was working at this bake shop, so I had to stop by and get chocolate chip cookies. And then, Cliff House and other parts of San Francisco shoreline. And then off back, now you're kind of away from the city again. And here you can see my bike leaning against the wall there. But yeah, that ride was a little steeper, a little more challenging. And then here we see, you can see all the seabirds hanging out on this rock. This is the sort of stuff you get to experience as you're riding along. And seals and sea lions too. Now we start getting into parts of California where it actually gets sunny. And here I was seeing my camera didn't really do it justice, but I saw a humpback whale swimming along the beach or along the shore. And go past the slough, and I thought the sign for this restaurant was pretty entertaining, but not entertaining enough to actually go and eat there. Now, the year that I did this, now the next section, there's often a very popular part of the tour is along the section called Big Sur. Unfortunately, the road was damaged in that section that year, so I had to basically follow the 101 inland of there. And so when you're riding along the coast, there's sort of this marine air effect. And, it stays pretty cool even in the summer. But as I went inland, here we are, we got clear skies, sunny. And then this one day I had to make distance. I got started, you know, before dawn, before the sun came up, I was actually already out riding. And then going up by Lake Nakasimo, you know, it's very sunny. You can see everything's very dry. And, you know, on that day, you know, around noon, the temperature climbed to over 100. And so I just found some shady trees and sat there and waited until the temperature had dropped back down below 100 again before I finished that section of the ride. Because, you know, if it's 110 degrees out, you don't really want to be riding. At least I don't. So I just sort of sat out on the side of the road in some shade and just relaxed. And probably about 3 different motorists pulled over and stopped and said, "Do you need some water or something?" So that was good to know. And then coming into Lompoc again, it's now we're starting to get some of the Los Angeles haze coming in. And then the final section was getting from Lompoc down to Carlsbad, which is, we have some friends in Carlsbad, so that's where I ended up. And in Santa Barbara was some good camping there. And now we did pick up, there was some section of trail in this area. And get to see some dolphins or porpoise. And in Long Beach, you get to see the Queen Mary. And I have a cousin that lives in Laguna Beach. And then I got down to Carlsbad. Carlsbad, it was interesting. Getting to there was, you actually have to ride on the shoulder of I-5 for a while, because
Ouch.
the only other choice is going through the military base, and it's like, you know, an extra like 30 miles if you go on this roads out and around. So you got to do like 5 miles on the shoulder of I-5. It's not too bad because in that section of it, you know, the traffic's only going 5 miles an hour anyway. So, you know, but here's kind of the before and after shots of going on this ride. You know, it definitely marked a good transition health-wise for me between, you know, working all the time and the next phase of my life. So that's my little thing.
Wow, great. Well, I've got some questions. Why did you choose to mark your distances in kilometers?
Well, I guess I do another type of writing as well. That's sort of like based in Europe, and they measure everything in kilometers. So that's kind of what my brain is wrapped around. I'm a member of a club, and I have been doing stuff with them. And now that I've settled back into Seattle, and they do rides, and their shortest ride is 100-kilometer ride. So they do more of these long distance rides. And of course, now I'm driving a Japanese imported vehicle, and the speedometer is in kilometers. So I guess I just think in kilometers.
Okay. Well, I've got the opportunity. How much pre-planning of this route did you make? I mean, did you say, well, I've got to stop in Astoria and I've got to see this wreck, or I really want to go through the redwoods, or did you just happen on bunches of these?
So the route itself is like well documented already.
Oh,
There's an organization called North American Adventure Cycling Association, and they have a bunch of published routes. So they sell maps and stuff like that that document various routes. Now, for the most part, this particular route, you just follow in the Highway 101. I mean, occasionally you're following Highway 1 in California, and occasionally there's some spots where you're, there's bike paths, but mostly you're just following the road, the main road. For me, like a lot of people do it very well planned out in terms of like, they know exactly on this night, this is where they're gonna camp and things like that. And I specifically, because I didn't have a lot of opportunity to train a set ahead of time, I was taking it of the approach of like, I'm not really gonna plan exactly where I'm gonna camp. I'm gonna take it as I go. And there's enough hiker biker campsites and motels and things like that along the way that you don't have to like plan it out all in advance. And like the hiker biker sites, like they have a general policy of like they're never full. So it's like like when you're car camping, there's a specific campsite and for one party, so you can get to a campground and say, well, sorry, there's no more spots. But with the hiker biker campsites, they're like, there's a hiker biker site and it's set up to comfortably accommodate 12 cyclists, but it could accommodate 20 if it had to. So, they just, it's set up so that you don't have to precisely plan your itinerary. And that's kind of the philosophy I went with.
Well, I see. Randy, if you don't mind, I'm going to stop the sharing so we can all look at
Okay.
it. All right. There we go. Well, I've got another question. How did you avoid getting killed?
Well, that's a good question. One of the things I do is I wear like a construction worker style reflective vest, and I have like a flashing red light on the back of my bike. So that makes me a little bit more visible. But for the most part, those roads are, there's enough cycle tourists that in general, there's an awareness that there may be bicycles on the road. And, compared to like, I mean, I have a lot of experience with like riding on the roads in Seattle and in New York City, that it's like, it's not too much of a it's like, it's something I'm used to. And so, compared to riding in a more urbanized area like a city like Seattle or New York City, it's like most of these roads are pretty empty and there's only occasional traffic. The only place where I really had any sort of unpleasant interaction with traffic was when I was in some horse ranch country. So it's interesting. It's like when I was like actually riding through like agricultural areas and like somebody's like moving a big piece of farm equipment down the road and stuff like that. Those guys gave me plenty of clearance and treated me with respect and all that. But when I got into sort of the horse ranch country and you'd get somebody in a jacked up and tuned pickup truck with lots of chrome that's $150,000 pickup truck, they'd be the ones that would do things like, as they approach you, they kind of slow down, match your speed, and then when their exhaust pipe is just in front of you, then they punch it. And because it's this they've tuned their diesel engine just show and maybe defeated some of the emissions controls purposely. You know, it pumps out this big sort of plume of black smoke. And they do that just to be jerks. You know, so it's like, okay, you're wealthy enough to throw $150,000 into a pickup truck. And this is the way you get your fun out of life, is by being a jerk to other people. Whereas, like, you know, the guy's driving a 1970s Ford pickup truck that's rusty. It's like, they don't give you any trouble. They give you plenty of clearance. So it's pretty interesting.
Did you run into any animal encounters of the unwanted variety?
Didn't really have any problems with that. I mean, it's like the hiker, several of the hiker biker sites where there may have been issues with, say, raccoons. They had like steel boxes where you can put your food so that you wouldn't have to worry about the raccoons like trying to steal your food or anything like that. So it's like, you know, in those sites, like they figured out where the raccoons want to go on a rampage, and you know, they take care of that.
So no dogs chasing after you?
Nah, was not an issue for me. Occasionally around here riding in King County, occasionally there'll be some dogs that make some noise, but it's just not really that much of an issue for me anyway. I guess they look at me and they go like, oh, okay, I'm gonna keep my distance.
Did you call home every night?
Not every night, but you know, Shelley can probably give you more accurate information on that. How often did I call you and say, this is where I'm at while I was on my bike ride?
Pretty regular, or you would, yeah.
Regular enough.
Yeah.
So.
And did you
There's some other stuff I do where I'm like out in the backcountry skiing for multiple nights, and I have like a satellite messenger that I use to send her like, had a great day, everything fine type messages. But you know, that situation is like with the phone and that bike ride, for the most part, it's like she could call me if there was something going on at home that I needed to know about. So fortunately, by the time I went on this bike ride, you know, those issues were mostly done for me. So, you know, my parents were gone by that time. You know, before both of my parents had passed on, I really couldn't have done this trip.
Uh-huh. So did you take your pictures with your phone?
Yes, I just used it. Basically, the phone was the main electronic gadget that I carried.
How'd you get home?
Flew.
Oh,
I didn't, and I actually gave my bike away on Craigslist when I was in San Diego.
Really?
Yeah, the bike had like 16,000 miles on the frame, and there were some things that were definitely wearing out. And the manufacturer of that particular bike had gone out of business. So it's like the only way I could really restore it to like, you know, full condition again, I'd have to have a bunch of parts custom made. And I was like, that's not worth it. So I, you know, sort of basically gave it away for free on Craigslist to where somebody's like, hey, this is, you know, if you want to ride on the bike trail, gently ride on the bike trail, it'll be fine. Sort of that sort of approach, and it would be for that, but some of this, like the suspension fork was not really working properly anymore, but you know, so if you were riding at speed on a bumpy road, it wouldn't be doing the job, but for cruising on a bike trail, not a problem.
So when you'd stop at these biker campgrounds, was it unusual to see another recumbent, or are they fairly a high proportion, or not high, I don't think, but substantial proportion?
I saw mostly people were riding regular upright bikes. Occasionally you'd see a few recumbents, but mostly it's the upright bikes.
And do you contemplate another either hiking, biking, or similar kind of trip, or kayaking?
You know, I've always got
Had a
plans. I've always got plans, although, you know, we're pretty busy on a day by day, week by week basis these days, you know, messing around with our grandkids. So, but they will take this summer. I know they're going to take a trip to see some of the other grandparents this summer. So that's probably when we'll do some sort of an extended trip again. But it'll only, you know, but it'll be a matter of a few weeks rather than, you know, a month. So. But you know, I'm doing more stuff sort of rather than the long thing. It's like here, you know, mixing things in on a regular basis.
All right, Randy, that was a spectacular trip. I feel both exhilarated and exhausted
Yeah.
by having come along with you. I'm amazed at your stamina and your courage and your wanderlust.
Yeah.
So my hats off to you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you for sharing it with
Okay.
us.
Okay.
So unless there are any other questions, I'm going to tell you that on January 4, Celia Curran, one of our great musicians, is going to talk about the development of her enthusiasm and practice as a singer, her enthusiasm for Jewish music. So that'll be a Wednesday night, January 4. And then in February, on the 15th, Kalish Leviel, who's a rabbi and a participant leader, I think, at the Center for Spiritual Living in Bellingham, is going to talk to us. She was a participant in the group that went to Spain. John Denker's with us here tonight. He knows Kalish from that trip. So those are the coming attractions. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I will leave this meeting open for a while. If you want to schmooze. And once again, Randy, thank you so much for bringing us along on this great adventure.
Sure, no problem.
Thanks. I
Good
will
night.
sign off for the night.
Okay, happy
That's the
Hanukkah.
end of the candles. Bye.
Bye.